All right, and welcome back to another episode of Phrasing FM, a podcast where I talk about languages and my experience building an app to learn them. Today, I want to talk about some of the alternatives to phrasing, and more specifically, why I didn't find any of them sufficient to learn languages, or why I felt the need to build my own language learning application. There are many different ways to learn a language. There are many different apps out there. So why did I need to build something different? What is different about phrasing? So we're going to go through 4 ways to learn a language without phrasing and why I don't like to learn languages in each of those ways. So the first one is the comprehensible input approach. This one has many names: language acquisition, comprehensible input, ALG or automatic language growth, dreaming Spanish. Some people would call it the dreaming Spanish method. And this is just the idea that you watch content over and over that's at or above your level, and you naturally pick up the language. It's just effortless. You just watch this interesting content and you stay engaged and you start to understand more and more. And then you leave, after a couple thousand hours, you have perfect ability to perform in the language. They make some pretty ridiculous claims when you start to look into any of these methods. And I have, a whole laundry list of issues with this method, but the most important one is I find it so boring. So boring. One of the things that I feel like is the biggest lie of this approach is just learn from interesting content. You cannot find interesting content when you don't speak a language. I know because I have tried, and it is impossible for me to keep up this habit. I persevere and I watch content for every single day for maybe max 2 weeks before I just cannot pay attention to what's being said anymore. I am so beyond bored, and it is such a slow and long process. This takes thousands of hours of watching really boring, repetitive content and content that you never want to see again because it's so simple. So it makes it really hard to rewatch it. And it is so not engaging and it is so slow that even if it did teach a language as well as it claims, I still would never be able to do it. Because for me, it's just not engaging. I don't want to spend that much time behind a screen just watching something that bores me. That's not a viable solution, let alone the fact that the amount of hours required alone will just limit the amount of language you can learn in your life. I feel like the whole learn a language just through comprehensible input is not a viable approach, especially not for me, and I don't think it's a viable approach for a lot of people. Now, that's not to say that comprehensible input is not effective. I still think input is required. You still have to expose yourself to the language at some point. However, I don't think it should be the primary driver of learning, especially in the beginning. The second way to learn a language would be through more traditional methods. These would be classrooms or textbooks, or even maybe assimil, any kind of guided, structured approach through the language. And this is definitely a viable way to learn a language. I think this is a much better way to learn a language than just the comprehensible input approach. However, there are a couple reasons that I don't like it and that I don't enjoy learning a language this way. One is that I'm not sure if it's necessarily slower. I think it is, but it definitely feels slower. These structured grammar exercises, they're so clean and sanitary and disconnected from the richness of language that I find them, they just feel to drag on so much. I also don't like the idea of learning through these different rules and trying to build up a language from the bottom from a set of grammar rules. I've mentioned in several other podcast episodes things like grammar is retrospective. I think grammar is best applied when you look back at a language and use the grammar to bucket it instead of starting with the grammar and trying to reconstruct a language from it. I say that grammar is retrospective, not prospective. And I also have a podcast on avoiding the proto-language, where when you learn a language this way, you you learn to speak a kind of language that people don't really speak. Like, if you've learned multiple languages, especially through the traditional method, or if you've even learned one, you know the feeling where you can confidently say, my name is Benjamin. I built phrasing. I am a software engineer. But you don't have any of the rich liveliness from a conversation. And I've I always feel like it's a detour. Like you spend so much time to get to this point, which yes, you're technically speaking a language, but at the same time, no, you don't speak the language, and you know you don't speak the language. And then once you get there, you have to then correct course to get back onto a native track. So it feels very circuitous. It feels like there's a big detour. And whenever I start learning a language with a traditional method, I always just feel like I'm going in the wrong direction. I've learned languages past that point. I've also finished these courses. One of the things is when you get to the end of these courses or these books, you don't speak the language. And they just, the advice at the end is like, okay, now go learn the language, which, I thought that's what I've been doing the whole time. So I personally, I don't enjoy this method of learning. And I wanted to find something that was more targeted, more direct, and just more efficient and more engaging. And so if we're talking something more efficient, then clearly that must be Anki or flashcards. This would also include Memrise and Lingvist and all of the other space repetition applications. If I want targeted, go for space repetition. So why don't I just use one of the space repetition apps on the market? And for a long time, I did. I am a longtime Anki user. I have used Anki many, many times to great success. I am a big fan of space repetition. However, I used Lingvist, it's another application, to even better success. And the differences, I would say, between Lingvist and Anki, now granted, they use different algorithms and they have an entirely different interface and they're very different applications, but they're both space repetition applications. The biggest difference between them, though, is that Lingvist is just enjoyable to use. It looks nice. It has audio integrated with it. It's much less effort. And it just overall is a nice experience. I don't dread using Lingvist nearly as much as I dreaded using Anki. And Anki is remarkable in that it is so effective, but it is such a hard habit to keep up. And even some Anki fanboys, I think, would have to agree that it can be really challenging at times to keep it up. A lot of people will call Anki their daily grind. And I don't think that language learning should feel like your daily grind. I think language learning should be, it doesn't have to be the most exciting part of your day, but I think it could be the most exciting part of your day. It should at least be a little bit of an exciting part of your day. It should be something that you look forward to doing. And maybe there's an initial resistance when you start using, you don't want to start using it. But once you start using it, you should not want to put it down. It should be exciting. It should be addicting. It should be engaging. And these just do not describe any of the other space repetition apps on the market. I could go into a bunch of reasons why. I am a front-end software developer who's just been very passionate about user experience for the past 15 years using these applications and just internally screaming as I'm using them at the just atrocious user experience that there is. And that's not to discredit these applications. They're great applications and they work phenomenally to learn a language. But the reason I don't want to use them is because I don't enjoy using them. And I want to learn languages for the rest of my life. And I want to be studying languages every single day for the rest of my life. And I don't want to be doing something that I don't enjoy every single day for the rest of my life. I want to really enjoy what I'm using, and I want it to look nice, and I want it to feel good, and I want it to not be stressful, and I want it to be addicting, and I want it to be effective, and all of these different little things. There's also a problem with these applications where, I saw on a YouTube comment somewhere that Anki is where you put stuff that you've already learned that you want to remember. And I found that to be so poignant and so true because a lot of these space repetition systems are really, really good if you know the content and you just want to remember it for longer. But they don't really answer the question of what if you don't know the content? What if you don't know anything about the language at all? Where do you start? How do you learn it? What if you get confused or lost? There are a bunch of different Anki decks out there that try to solve this by introducing words one at a time. So you start with one word and then you build up to a couple words and then little phrases with those words. So each new word you've only seen, or each new word only contains words that you've seen in previous cards, which is a great idea that you're building this up. And then as you're going through, you're understanding everything because you've seen everything before. But that's not remotely how memory works. And so, yes, it's a good ordering, but sometimes you'll see a word and you will remember it just immediately. You'll never have any problems remembering it. It just sticks to your brain for whatever reason. In Croatian, nestrpljenje just stuck in my brain and I never forgot it, despite the fact that it's not even, I can't even pronounce it. I don't even know the sounds, and it should be a really complicated word. But then other words, you have to study them over and over, and they're just not sticking, and they can take months before they get past that sticking point and you start to remember them. And so it's a nice idea with the building up these decks with just words that you know, but within a month, it's all over the place. Yes, you've seen the words that you've seen all the words before, but you don't necessarily know them, and it doesn't deliver on what I feel like is promised, or at least on what I want out of an application. And then the fourth way to learn a language would be with apps like Duolingo, or more traditional language learning apps. Maybe Babbel would be in here. Anything that's kind of a guided course for how you learn a language on an application. And these all suffer from the same problems as the traditional approaches that I mentioned before, but they suffer from they also suffer from the same problems as the third group. But they also suffer with a bigger problem in my mind. And that's that a lot of them are optimized for mass appeal. There is a concept in software engineering, the tyranny of the marginal user, which I really like. And it can probably be best described by Facebook, where Facebook made a product that everybody really liked. They got, however many people using it, millions, tens of millions, hundreds of millions, and then, a billion people. And so in order to get more people to use it, you have to make it more attractive to that second billion group of people. However, what those second billion group of people want is really counter to what the first billion group of people wanted. The first million users, the first 10 million users, what they want, it's very different from what the second billion, third billion, fourth billion group of people want. And so the product just gets worse and worse and worse. At least that's how it feels to the people who originally signed up, because you're trying to target a larger and larger audience. And with apps like maybe I shouldn't be calling them out too much, but with these more traditional style applications, a lot of them are really focused on day zero. Like, how do you take a user who has never studied a language before and get them started with language learning? And how do you then get them engaged and keep them coming back? These are their core principles. These are their core tenets. They're publicly traded companies that need to grow. And the way that they need to grow is by getting new users. And the way to do that is to find people who have not learned languages before, or who have not used these applications before. And so the experience just becomes worse and worse and worse for the people who do want to learn a language. So I don't think you can learn a language to fluency with Duolingo. I don't think you can learn a language to fluency with Babbel. That doesn't make these bad applications. They're great applications, but they're just targeting something different. They're targeting the user who has not learned languages before and needs things to be really guided. They need to have their hands held. And that's not me. I've learned several languages. I love language learning. I'm way too deeply I'm way in the deep end over here. I want to just hit the ground running and just go through my reviews and learn more language than ever possible. That's my goal. That's what I want. I want to maximize the amount of language I can learn in my life. And that's not going to happen through these guided applications. And so those are the 4 ways to learn a language and why I do not like using them, and why none of them really stood out to me as a way to learn a language. I got to this point where I wanted to improve my languages and or I wanted to continue to learn more languages, improve my existing languages, and I could never really commit to one of these paths for the aforementioned reasons. There's also another reason that none of them really worked for me, and that's that I wanted to learn multiple languages. I really want to learn Croatian. However, I really need to improve my Dutch. And also, I'd like to improve my French. And also, I'd like to improve my Italian because it's been a really long time and that's gotten really rusty. I've basically forgotten Portuguese. And so I'd like to re-remember that language. But I know in the future, I want to learn Arabic and I want to learn Japanese and Chinese. And these are languages that I will not regret having exposure to. Even if it's a very little amount of exposure, they're such foreign languages that if I get some exposure over several years and just internalize some of the basics, that's going to go such a long way when I decide to start seriously studying these languages. And so I was always faced with this choice. Do I improve my existing languages? Do I start a new language? Or do I start learning a language that I know I want to learn, but I know it's going to take several years? And the thing is, I didn't want to have to choose between these. I wanted to do them all. And I don't mind if it's slower. I know these are all goals that I want to achieve in my life. Why not do them at the same time? Why not just make progress on all of these at the same time? So that was another big reason. This isn't tied to any specific approach, but none of these approaches really work for managing all of your goals. I know because I've tried using different approaches. And once you start to add 2 or 3 languages, it just starts to get so overwhelming because they're managing, context switching, doing multiple things. It feels like multiple items on your to-do list, where with phrasing, I just have one item on my to-do list, languages, and I configure my priorities, and phrasing teaches me things according to my priorities. There's also an issue with all of the previous methods where none of them really work for existing languages. For example, I speak French and Dutch, not fluently, but relatively fluently. And I would love to improve them, but none of these options are good options for me to improve these languages. I don't find that much engaging content in French and Dutch. That's not to say that it doesn't exist. Just I don't really watch movies. I don't really watch TV shows. And there's a couple YouTubers that I follow in both of them, and I'm always looking for new ones, but I don't find that much engaging content. Both of these languages I've finished all of the books already. So I could go back and refresh some grammar, but if it was boring the first time, I don't know how I'm going to go through and get through those books a second time. I could use Anki for sure. For sure, I could use a spaced repetition application to improve these languages. But if Anki is already stressful for me to use, then doing it in a language where I already speak, I'm definitely not going to have the motivation. There is a little bit of this idea that, French and Dutch have lost their magic for me because I've already learned them. And that's not to say that they have lost all of their magic, but when I'm learning a new language, there's a lot of excitement. And there's a lot of excitement that allows me to push through a lot of stress. So I feel like I can get a lot more done in Anki or Lingvist with new languages than with languages I already speak. And then I think for obvious reasons, I can't use Duolingo or Babbel because I've already finished these. And, any application I try to use, I just feel like I'm way too far ahead. And there's no way to get started in any of these solutions because I've already started the language. I've already made a bunch of progress. And so I really wish there was an application that I could just open up and start learning French. Like, there's so much French I could be learning. I wish I could just open an app and start improving my French. And so these are all the reasons that I set off to make phrasing. One, when it comes to improving my French, I learn new words in French every day without configuring my existing level or anything like that. I just open up phrasing. The language contouring technique works exceptionally well. Even if you already speak a language, you feel like you're making progress from day one. I can configure all my different priorities in my different languages. So I don't have a giant to-do list of language stuff. I just have one item on my to-do list, and that's just languages. And I configure my priorities. My priorities change, but my habits don't. Phrasing doesn't pull any punches. It's not geared towards there's no tyranny of the marginal user. I just want to make an app that teaches the most language possible. And an app that can take you all the way to fluency and beyond. There's no finishing phrasing ever. You never reach the end of phrasing. There's always more language. There's always more phrasing, which is exactly what I want. The experience is simple, addicting. The UI is incredible. Explanations everywhere, so you're never lost and confused. The algorithm tries to work with human psychology. I sometimes call it dopamine-driven reviews, where my primary goal is to get you to do more reviews. Even if the reviews are 1% less effective each, if you do 2 times as many reviews, well, you made a whole lot more progress and you probably struggled a lot less doing it. There's no due dates, there's no stress, there's no slog, there's no you finished your reviews for the day, because there's always more reviews that you can do. It's just a never-ending, infinite scroll of ways to improve your language. What's the most optimal thing you could be reviewing right now? You start learning expressions, native level expressions, from day one. So you avoid the proto-language for sure. There's no dry, clean, sanitary learning of sentences. You just jump into native level sentences. And at native level speed of audio, I intentionally do not slow down the audio, because the point is to train you to speak with natives. And so even if the audio is way too fast in the beginning, there's another concept in phrasing that I haven't really discussed, where there's an intentional reason that expressions are so limited and that you only get a fixed number of expressions per month. Part of that is cost, but the reason I can justify the cost is because if you have fewer expressions, you see those expressions over and over more. If you're learning 10 different words from an expression, you're going to see that expression almost every day. And that might sound like it's incredibly dry and boring, but I promise you it's not. You're so lost in another language that you don't realize that you're repeating this content over and over. But that means you're getting exposed to the same content over and over and over and over, the same audio track over and over and over and over. And you get really good at picking out the words that the audio is saying, especially since it's highlighted in line. So this really does allow you to start learning from native level sentences from day one. And even if it's confusing on day one, or overwhelming on day one, it's not overwhelming by day 10, that's one of the biggest pieces of feedback I get about phrasing, is that they can just understand native speakers so much better, or they can pick out individual words so much better, or they recognize their words in context so much better versus other spaced repetition applications. And then lastly, versus comprehensible input, phrasing does have this idea of comprehensible input a little bit baked into it. Now, this one's a little bit of a cheat, but I do believe you get a large benefit of comprehensible input with phrasing. And the reason being is that when you use long expressions, they are way too long for you to hold in your head. And so you have to get into this asynchronous flow of understanding the sentence. And there is an issue with comprehensible input where it's very poorly defined. What is comprehensible input? And so my question is, how long does content need to be before it's comprehensible input? Because a 2-hour-long movie is comprehensible input. A 30-minute TV show is comprehensible input. A 10-minute YouTube essay is comprehensible input. A 3-minute short is probably comprehensible input. Like, how short can you make something and still get the benefits of comprehensible input? And my own hypothesis is that so long as you cannot repeat back the beginning, by the time you get to the end, then it's comprehensible input, or it can be used as comprehensible input. And with the expressions, that's definitely the case. Granted, they're only 10, 15 seconds long, but there's no way you can repeat back the beginning of the expression by the time you get to the end of it. And maybe that doesn't make it comprehensible input. I don't know. It's not my hypothesis. But it definitely does do something different with your brain. And I think you're getting the same benefits from that you would be from comprehensible input. And so with all of these, you put all of these together and you get phrasing. And it finally solves all of the problems that I have with learning languages. And I feel like I can really make progress in all my languages and just really commit. I feel like this is a process and a habit that I can keep up for the rest of my life. It's something that I enjoy doing. It's something that I get addicted to. And it's just been really, really effective so far. So if any of this has resonated with you, if you're trying to learn multiple languages, if you want to learn multiple languages, if you're just learning one language or want to learn one language, give phrasing a shot. I really think that it is definitely my favorite way to learn a language. Now, that is obviously incredibly biased, but it's definitely an effective way to learn a language. Plenty of users are getting tons of benefit out of it. I'm getting tons of benefit out of it. And if you've struggled with any of these other methods for the same reasons I said, then, I built phrasing for you. So give it a try, Phrasing.app. If you have any questions, leave them in the comment down below, and I'll catch you next time. Thanks.